Okay, this is going to be a little primer on lichens, and this is actually a lichen. Where's my thumb? I'm going to say this is Xanthoria, maybe elegans, but it is on a piece of wood, actually specifically a piece of juniper, but it is a pretty little lichen. And anyway, lichens are something to look at. Lichens are, say, 98% fungus. That's the housing. And then the remainder is the algae. And the algae is the photobiont, so it is doing the photosynthesizing and then passing on its photosynthate, so sugars and, well, probably sugars, primarily, maybe a few hormones, to the fungus, which is the microbiont in this situation. And yes, there's going to be a lot of technical vocabulary in here. But anyway, lichens are usually studied by bryologists, but it's technically lichenology, so it really should be studied by mycologists, in which I think it generally is. But traditionally, a lot of bryologists end up studying it. But anyway, what we're looking at is, I'm going to say, well, this is not a good example, but anyway, I'm going to say this is probably a foliose lichen. But anyway, all lichens are divided into a couple of categories, one of which is crustose, and there's a variety of crustose, but crustose is the broad category. So this little booger is called Rhizocarpum geographicum. And that is not the only thing that we're looking at. We're looking at the yellow thing. And so you can't really separate the lichen from the, you can see there's like at least 2 other species. That's what I'm talking about. Maybe 3. But it is on a rock, and you can't separate the rock. There we go, rock. From the lichen terribly well and come up with anything. That's going to just disintegrate. So anyway, that's a crustose, forms a crust. The next one, like I said, that one, there's a little fungus on the fungus. That one's the foliose. Perhaps not the best foliose. This is a good foliose lichen. See, it has an upper surface right there. Get my probe here. And a lower surface. Let's see, there we go. And it's got these rhizoids that attach. I don't know if they do any absorbing, but much like mosses, they absorb everything through the atmosphere, so they are very sensitive to pollution. And there's pollution indicators, so in the city it's interesting to collect mosses and lichens and see what's going on. Usually they disintegrate and they're just a bunch of particles loosely attached in polluted areas. In highly polluted areas, it's clean. There are not a lot of mosses or lichens. So if you see lichens, the air is pretty clean. But anyway, this particular one is Peltigera, probably neopolydactla, and probably, I'm going to say hyphum is the moss. But anyway, this is probably one of the most common foliose lichens, terrestrial lichens in the area, Ouray County, certainly not in the city, but it's, well, probably because of disturbance. But in the perimeter trail, you see this just all the time. And I want to say neopolydactla, which I realize is a group. It's just everywhere, although I see some non-fruiting structures on some of them. So let's see, here's the fruiting structure on this foliose, and I shouldn't go too far on that. On these, on this one, there's the fruiting structure. They look like little mushrooms because they're little mushrooms. You notice that Well, let me finish my thought here. And then the third category is, I can do it. This is a well, we're not focused too much. There we go. Fantastic little one that I found on the perimeter trail. This is a, let's say a ramelanum of some sort. Diacerata. I'm taking an educated guess. The issue, but anyway, let me finish the thought there. So this is a fruticose one, and so it is a three-dimensional shape, and attached by a single holdfast, and you can see the holdfast right there. Anyway, you can see the, let's see if I can find where I am here. There's the fruiting structure. So, looks like a little mushroom, and the spores are up here. So in the mushroom universe, this would be an ascomycete, which is a little bit primitive. It's not really a good way of saying it. It's a fairly simple line. So it is, the spores are pointed up in little structures called asci, whereas in basiomycetes, so your normal mushrooms you might buy at the store, those are basiomycetes, so the spores are on these little things called, what is it, clavia? No, it's not quite right. They're on the little basiums. So they hang down and the spores are attached to it, much like, you know, fingers on a fist. So this is another lichen, and this is a fruticose. And this particular one is called Usnea. There's a lot of Usneas at certain elevations here, and when you see Usneas, often enough, you know that it's kind of moist. So you're not necessarily in the desert, but I did find an Usnea. Yeah, that show. See, there's kind of a bungee cord. There we go. See a little bungee cord in there? See? And that is a characteristic of the Usneas. And they form these little hedgy things. And there's the single holdfast right there. But how the branches come off a main stalk, if they do, and how much disintegration takes place or not takes place is characteristic. The tricky thing here is there's not a lot of good keys to lichens for this particular area. It's either north of us, or there's some stuff for California and various other places. Sometimes states have their own lichen flora published, but not so much for here. Which is disappointing, since it's like, well, is that what I think it is? But anyway, this is, so I'm giving more genera than species here. But this particular one is actually, you can make a tincture out of it. In other words, not dissolve it, but soak it in vodka or Everclear, and you get a tincture, and it's used in stomach ailments. But sometimes these guys have a hard enough life other than being soaked in alcohol. Oops. The so get that. The Peltigera is one of these things that reindeers chew on. So this is starvation food. And let's see, one of my favorites, which you see quite abundantly, is this one. And this is a stereotypic Cladonia. This is pyxiana, or pyxidata, and it is tiny. It is tiny, and this is one of the, oh my goodness, said I, on the moss here. Those are the fruiting bodies on mosses. So it has this wrinkled wrinkled thallus down here at the base. Let's see if I can coordinate here. This is fairly typical. And then these are the fruiting structures, and so the spores come out here. So quite a bit of these. Is the wine glass lichen. This is a little dwarfy one, but anyway, very cute. You see it frequently, and pretty easily identified. I've only seen one or two Cladonias. There's also a thing called Cladonia, which looks like an Usnia, but it's hollow on the inside. But anyway, lichens are fascinating things. Fascinating things. So this is, well, it could be a Xanthoria, but Caloplaca. But there's quite a few things going on there. So this is a little twig that came off a tree that fell, and there's just all sorts of things on that branch. Say half a dozen lichens. See a lot of fruiting bodies, but just amazing stuff. But anyway, lichens are interesting. They're reasonably easy to identify broadly if it's the good key for the area. Like I said, that seems to be lacking, and that's disappointing in and of itself. But there's a lot of specialized vocabulary. There's a lot of course, fungus mycology, mycological vocabulary dealing with these things. And then you need various chemicals, most of which are not difficult to come by. You just need to make them up. That you expose it to, and they do a color change or not color change and stuff like that. So. As I said, there are three broad categories. Usually at the beginning of the key are like, is it a crestose, is it a foliose, is it a fruticose lichen, and you make that decision and you move on. But knowing where and growing on what is critical. But anyway, it's just absolutely a fascinating group of organisms. I've always enjoyed them when, of course, the key is adequate. It is, I'm not sure if I'm going to bother people about checking on some of my identification, but like I said, once you really get into lichens, and there are cultures that do in fact enjoy a good lichen. I mean, how can you not when you start looking at them, when you start looking at them. It's just absolutely fascinating what is going on in there, but that's just, got a couple of things. Just amazing stuff. And I have not found this lichen again, so that's disappointing. And the thing is, when a lichen breaks up, it can separate the algae, the photobiont can separate from the fungal biont, and you'll have two separate organisms. So together they make this, but separated they'll do something else. So a lot of the, there's very few basiomycetes. Lichens, they usually form little mushrooms, like toadstools, that come off of it. Ascomycetes, lichens, which is what you see here, will do these little cup-like shapes, and you dissect those to get the spores out, then you have to identify the spores. And so it can be quite involving, and for some of these, you need to have the right microscopes, plural, on that. So fascinating, hard to get good keys on, on some of them. One of the things to consider here is that this is such an early relationship that happened that this is an ascomycete. So basiomycetes, if you want to think of those as mammals, ascomycetes are reptiles. And even on the photobiont, there's the blue-green algae, which is basically a photosynthetic algae, are true algae, and true algae are, related to plants in a distant way. But with the nucleus and vacuoles and all that sort of stuff, that's the true algae, and that's when you tear open one. I don't have a good I don't have a good hydrated lichen that I can tear open, but they can either be grass green on the inside, and that's the that's the true algae, or they can be blue-green on the inside, and that's the photosynthetic bacteria known as cyanobacteria. So it's blue-green or grass-green, and sometimes that's not always easy to tell. But anyway, one is the cyanobacteria tends to be nitrogen fixing, so it provides the lichen, the fungus, with nitrogen, which is a rarefied element that is one of the components of proteins. Actually, what distinguishes proteins from carbohydrates. So very important. And let's see, the lungwort, pulmonaria, I believe. It is one of the major nitrogen sources in ecosystems where it is prevalent. And lichens, since they are a fungus and they can fragment, they tend to blow around the earth. So you can see ramalanas or usneas everywhere in the world, and sometimes you can legitimately use the lichen key of England to identify lichens in Oregon or New England or wherever. But there are varieties, and sometimes your American types are not seen as European types or Asian types, which since these are products of fragmentation, in other words, cloning, you can have it starting in one part of the world and then scattering throughout the world, and then mutations happen over, we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of years, a billion years. You can have slight mutations, and so lichens tend to be found in similar species and similar habitats, somewhat, not 100% in any way, but let's say 80. So I can go into the forest here and say, oh yes, that's this, that's an Usnia, that's a Peltigera. It's like, well, what species is another story. So I'm not completely out of my element studying lichens primarily in Western Oregon, but certainly trips to Eastern Oregon. So anyway, absolutely fascinating group of organisms. I do not know why people aren't into this, but I think I'd have to use the word stupid to go into that. But anyway, lichens are our friends. Try not to step on too many of them. There you go.